Hi, welcome to ACCQ Continuing Professional Education. Pag naisip natin yung accounting, ano yung unang pumapasok sa isipan natin? Di ba debit and credit? Pero may isa pang equation na synonymous sa accounting, lalo na pag naisip natin ito. Ito yung tinatawag na the accounting equation, or A is equal to L plus equity or capital. No, ito yung equation na tinatawag na universal accounting equation. No, bakit? Kasi laging kumbaga laging equal yan. A is equal to liabilities or assets is equal to liabilities plus equity and or capital. Now, pagka naisip natin yung assets is about yung cash, accounts receivable, inventory. Ito yung ito yung karagdagan doon sa company. Pero ang madalas na iniiwasan natin, even sa labas, in the real world, ito yung liabilities. Ito yung pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Ano ba itong liabilities? Mahalaga ba ito? Karamihan ng mga negosyante iniiwasan to. Pero napakahalaga nito, especially now in this time of pandemic. Now, under the definition of conceptual framework in financial reporting, liabilities are present obligations of an entity to transfer economic resources as a result of past events. Now, there are three major elements ng definition na yun. Number one is that an entity has a present obligation. Obligation is a duty or responsibility of an entity that has no practical ability to avoid. In other words, wala na silang magawa, kailangan nilang bayaran kasi na-incur na nila yung utang. Now, hindi mahalaga whether yung payee or kung kanino babayaran is known. Ang mahalaga is that yung company na may utang, kailangan niya nang i-recognize. So that's number one. Number two, or next, is that the obligation is to transfer economic resource. Now, this is the very heart of the definition of liabilities. Now, ano ba itong transfer economic resource? So, this is the asset that represents a right with a potential to produce economic benefits. Sinulat ko na pa rin para matandaan ko. So, ito yung represent a right with potential benefits. Halimbawa, meron kang asset. Yung asset na yon, ito yung of course, nagbibigay sa iyo ng income. Example, cash. Yung pinaka-common, cash. Nagbibigay ito sa iyo you invest cash to give you income in return. So, itong itong economic resource to ibabayad mo. Ito yung ita-transfer mo doon sa pinagkakautangan mo. So, speaking of cash, ano pa ba yung na yun? Specifically, ano pa yung mga pwedeng pambayad? So, specifically, obligation must be to pay cash. Transfer non-cash asset on service or at some future event. Last, among the essential characteristics of the definition of liability is that the liability arises from a past event. So, kailangan na-incur muna nila yung liability. Or halimbawa, let's say umutang sila sa bangko. So, umutang sila, nakuha nila yung proceeds ngayon for 100,000. Tapos, monthly, binabayaran nila yung principal plus interest. So, it has arise from a past event. Nangyari na. So, na-incur na nila. So, meron na silang obligation to pay yung loan na yun. Right now, we're going to talk about yung examples ng mga liabilities. Ano ba itong mga to? Tignan natin. Yan na kagad, bilis na sulat ko. So, examples of liabilities, ito yung more common types of liabilities. This includes the following: accounts payable to suppliers for the purchase of goods. So, halimbawa, meron kang grocery or convenience store. So, meron kang supplier doon ng mga goods mo. Now, ito, sinusupply nila yung yung grocery mo. no? And then binabayaran mo sila normally at the end of the month. So ito yung tinatawag na na accounts payable from trade suppliers. So binabayaran mo sila kasi hindi naman most of the time meron kang excess cash to pay that. No, so ito yung parang pinapaikot mo yung pera. So pagka kumita ka na dito, then ibabayad mo. So parang umiikot lang yun, operational. Number 2 is amounts withheld from employees for taxes and contribution sa SSS. So ito yung mga sa payroll, meron doon yung mga kaltas kung tawagin. Ito yung sa BIR, so i-remit ito sa BIR. So ito once na nakuha mo na yung income nila and then na-compute mo na yung tax, halimbawa ikaw yung employer, then you're bound to remit kung magkano man yung tax ng yung empleyado mo, and then of course yung SSS nila, yung inuhulog. And then so that constitutes a liability, the short-term liability or current liability. Yung pangatlo naman, accruals for salaries interest, rent, taxes, product warranties, profit sharing, bonus, yan sa mga salaries. So pagka nagtrabaho na yung yung empleyado mo sa'yo, so bound ka ng bayaran siya. No, so that becomes already a liability. Hindi mo pwede sabihin thank you na lang or naisip mo na hindi na kita babayaran. Hindi pwede yun kasi nagawa niya na yung trabaho niya. No? Hindi mo na mababawi yun. No? Hindi niya na mababawi yun. So you're bound to pay whatever yung service niya. So that is accruals for salaries. And then interest, of course, rent, yung renta sa, let's say, sa inuupahan mo, taxes, product warranties, yung pagka, let's say, sa appliance, normally may warranty yun. So yung appliance center o yung company, pagka nagbenta sila, merong warranty yun kasi pwedeng isoli yun or pwedeng palitan ng bago. No, so these are so kumbaga meron silang warranty payable. No? So pag-uusapan natin 'yon in a later discussion. And then yung cash dividends declared but not paid. Ito, so once na nag-declare na yung company sa isang korporasyon ng dividends, no, then na sila, kumbaga they're already liable to pay the shareholders of the company. Now that can also be discussed especially sa stockholders equity, which is part 3 of the intermediate accounting. And then next one, letter E, is deposit and advances from customers. So pagka nakapag-advance sa'yo yung customer, halimbawa in a lessor-lessee relationship, ikaw yung nagpapaupa tapos meron kang lessee, nakapag-advance siya sa'yo ng 3 months rent. So magi-start sa Oktubre. So yung binayaran niyang rent equivalent to 3 months starting October, November, December. So assuming it's 10,000 each month, so binigyan ka ng 30,000. So ngayon, ano pa yun? That is advances. That constitutes advances. Hindi mo pa income yun. Kasi pwedeng mabawi pa yun, no? Kasi wala pang service o hindi pa naglalapse yung time. Okay, next is debt obligation for borrowed funds, notes, mortgages, and bonds payable. So ito yung mga long-term mga non-current payables na to, which we will talk about in the later discussion. And income tax payable, kailangan mo magbayad sa BIR, no, yung quarterly. Yan, so that is normally constitutes part of the current liability. And last one is yung unearned revenue. Yung bang in advance na sa'yo pero hindi mo pa nagagawa yung serbisyo. Now, this practically constitutes the common types of liabilities na pag-uusapan natin as we go. Now, dito sa liability, just like sa assets, ang concern natin dito is yung measurement ng liability. So, kung paano natin sinusukat kung magkano yung lalabas dun sa financial statements. So, dito sa liability na pag-usapan rin natin na may dalawang klaseng liability. Merong current liability, ito yung mga short-term liability na within 1 year or within the normal operating cycle, which incidentally we will talk about in a little while. Yung pangalawa naman is yung non-current liabilities. Ito yung mga mas matagal pa dun sa beyond 1 year or beyond the normal operating cycle. Now dito sa current liabilities, ito'y sinusukat doon sa face amount nila. Dati doon sa sa present value, and then subsequently doon sa amortized amount. Pero napaka immaterial na nun because it's short term. No, it's just short term. Let's say for example, merong liability doon sa let's say sa supplier, no, so worth 10,000 pesos na binayaran nito after 6 months. So kung meron man inflation doon, yung cost of hindi na yun sinasama. So kung ano lang yung face amount, kung ano lang yung alam na amount nung pagkakautang doon. So hindi na kino-consider dito yung mga rate of inflation kung meron man dito sa short term or sa current liability. Dito naman sa sa non-current, it is initially measured at its present value and subsequently doon sa kanyang amortized cost. Examples of this yung bonds payable. Yan. So pag-uusapan natin yan in a later discussion. Now, pag-uusapan naman natin ngayon yung current liabilities. Paano ba nasusukat na para mapunta doon sa category as current liabilities? Ito siya. Number 1 is that din sa under PAS or Philippine Accounting Standard number 1, paragraph 69 provides that an entity shall classify as a liability as current when these four is present. Number 1 is that the entity expects to be settled the liability within the entity's operating cycle. Now, ano ibig sabihin ng operating cycle? Ito yung normal course ng business dun sa company na yan. Now, generally speaking, it's about 1 year. So, if it's within 1 year na isa-settle yung liability, then that is considered as current liabilities. Pero kung mas mahaba pa yung operating cycle nila, kasi merong mga industry na medyo mahaba yung singilan. No? So, katulad ng appliances, yung mga sa real estate. So, ginagamit doon yung normal operating cycle nila, which is sometimes more than a year. So, but still considered as a current liability. Number 2 is the entity holds the liability primarily for the purpose of trading. So, ginagamit ito dun sa mismong operations nila, whatever that is. Pangatlo, the liability is due to be settled within 12 months after the reporting date. So, ito lang yung kumbaga, ito yung pinaka-benchmark natin, 12 months after the operating date, which is December, let's say December 31, and then within 1 year. So, another cycle yun. The entity does not have unconditional right to defer settlement of the liability for at least 12 months after reporting period. So, hindi niya pwedeng i-defer yung settlement na yon. In other words, hindi niya pwedeng i-postpone. Now, aside from this sa trade, meron din tayong tinatawag na other liabilities, other current liabilities. Ito yung mga maring within the normal operating cycle or within 12 months. So, examples of this, so other current liabilities are not settled. They are not settled as part of the normal operating cycle, but are due within 12 months, so they are still considered as current liabilities after the reporting period or held primarily for the purpose of trading. So examples of that is financial liabilities held for trading, bank overdraft, dividends payable. Ito yung mga utang mo dun sa mga stockholders. So these are non-trade. Income taxes, other non-trade payables, and current portion of the non-current financial liabilities, which will be talked about in the future. Ito yung bang nag-due siya dun sa let's say 5-year bonds payable, nag-due siya nung kada taon, binagbabayad ka ng part of the principal, no? So sa loob ng 5 taon, so yung mag-due para dun sa 1 taon, then that's the non-current portion of the current portion of the bonds payable or the long-term payable, which we will talk about. Naman natin ngayon yung non-current liabilities. Ano ba yung mga non-current liabilities? First, we have to look at the criteria para paano maging non-current liabilities. So all liabilities not classified as current are classified as non-current. Siyempre kung hindi siya current, dun siya sa non-current. Dalawa lang naman pupuntahan yan. This includes non-current portion of a long-term debt. So for example, yung bonds payable or yung utang sa bangko, let's say a bank loan, no, for 5 years. So yung magjuju para doon sa isang taon, that is a current portion. Yung the rest, no, that is a long term or non-current portion of a long-term debt. Number 2 is finance lease liability. Ito yung mga mahahabang yung mga leases, which pwedeng capital lease, no? So we will talk about that in the future. Long deferred tax liability. Ito yung more than a year. So hindi siya masesettle within let's say the operating cycle, no? And then long-term obligation to officers, and finally long-term deferred revenue. So examples here, ito yung sa mga long-term constructions, no, kasi babawiin muna nila yung cost bago sila mag-recognize ng revenue, or depende dun sa completion ng construction. Okay, so long-term debt falling due within 1 year. If a liability which is due to be settled within 12 months after the reporting date is classified as current. So take note of that, that's current. Even if the original term was for a period longer than 12 months. So ibig sabihin lang yan, pagka siya na gano'n, isi-settle siya within 1 year. If within 1 year or 12 months after the reporting period after December 31 is classified as current. So, ano pa rin siya? So, settled within 12 months. Okay, so after December 31 of the previous year, and within 1 year pa rin yun. So, if the original term was for a period longer than 12 months, so that's a condition. If the original term was for a period longer than 3 months, even if the condition, so yun, even if kahit na raw na yung original term was a period longer than 12 months. And yung pangalawa, an agreement to refinance or reschedule payment on a long-term basis is completed after the reporting period and before the financial statement are issued for issue, authorized for issue. So ibig sabihin lang nito, kasi meron tayong dalawang dates. Ito yung reporting period. Reporting period is normally when the financial statements are yung pinaka-calendar year niya, which is December 31. So halimbawa sa taong 2020, December 31, 2020, that is the reporting period. And yung issuance normally mas mas nag-extend pa yung kasi hindi naman kaagad na December 31 yung reporting period mo, ganun na rin yung issuance mo kasi marami pang adjustments yon. So, well, basta hindi aabot ng April 15, which is yung tax deadline. So, normally mga March, ganun yung issuance nung financial statement. Now, ito raw, kasama pa yan, it's still considered as current pa rin yan. If an agreement to refinance or schedule payment on a long-term basis is completed after the reporting period, which is after December 31, and before the issuance of the covenants. Ano ba itong covenants na to? Itong covenants, karaniwan nakikita ito between dun sa agreement between the lender and the borrower. So ito yung mga do's and don'ts ng isang borrower to protect the interest of the lender. So as we can see here, covenants are often attached to borrowing agreements which represents undertakings of the borrower. So these are like the do's and don'ts ng isang borrower. So example of these are actually restrictions on the borrower as to undertaking further borrowings, paying dividends, maintaining specified level of working capital, and so forth. So para ma-protectionan yung nagle-lend, no? So usually dito sa mga financial institutions and bangko, merong merong mga kasunduan doon. So these are the covenants No, so pagka nagano ka, if you let's say purchase a car, no, yung financing, so merong covenant doon na kailangan yung ano mo, yung bank account mo is may pondo yun every time na mag-i-encash or nag-auto debit. So otherwise there would be a breach of covenant. So under these covenants, if certain conditions relating to the borrower's financial situation are breached, the liability becomes payable on demand. So pag let's say nag-ano sila, nag-breach sila dun sa covenant, let's say hindi sila nakabayad nung interest that falls due on a certain date, so magiging payable on demand na. So makikita natin minsan if you have already experienced borrowing from a financial institution, pag nag-overdue tayo sa dun sa payment natin, let's say on a monthly payment, it becomes due, pay immediately nakalagay, no? Pero dito sa under this circumstance right now we're having, this is a global pandemic, a lot of companies, even individuals experience yung delay dun sa payments, and meron namang may adjustment naman yan because we're not living in normal times. So these are some of the salient features of a covenant. So PAS 1 paragraph 74 provides that such a liability is classified as current even if the lender has agreed. So kahit na raw pumayag yung lender na after the reporting period and before the statement are authorized for issue not to demand payment as a consequence of the breach. So kahit na may breach daw yan, it's still classified as current. So these are some of the situations concerning yung covenants. Now on our second part of this series in liabilities, we'll be talking more on the types of liabilities and encounter a lot of problems there as we go along. So if you have any questions, you can just write your comments, and of course subscribe. Stay safe, God bless, and keep your hands clean.